The Big Tech Podcast, brought to you by Sky Broadband. Get the power to do more with Sky's best ever Wi-Fi, with lightning fast speeds rolling out to 1 million homes.
Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian, the tech editor of the Irish and Sunday Independent. And thanks to Sky Broadband for sponsoring this podcast. This week we're talking to the Senior Vice President at Twitch, Damian Burns.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to be on.
Well, I've been wanting to look at Twitch for a while. I mean, the numbers are staggering. You came out with your figures there pretty recently, and over 2 million average viewership at any given moment. Daily visitors of 26.5 million, 6 million content creators, unique content creators. I mean, to a lot of people, Twitch has kind of come out of nowhere. I say to a lot of people because I'm used to talking to people who, their exposure to social media might be Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch all of a sudden is this huge main player. Or is all of a sudden the wrong phrase to use?
Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, the pace. No, I think it's right, and I think it kind of alludes to the pace of growth and the dynamic nature of the service. And actually, the figures you just referenced have evolved very recently. So we've now got 30 million people every day on the service. At any given moment, there's actually 2.5 million people on Twitch, and we've got 7 million streamers, people broadcasting on the platform in any given month. So that kind of fast-paced change is part of the DNA of the service. Has it come out of nowhere? No. I mean, it's well into being a decade old now. I think it has just been on this journey from being historically very much centered around gaming to one now where people are taking what is essentially a live interactive video streaming service and using it to find communities and connections around shared passions and interests, and that spans a whole host of categories.
I mean, it really does, because I was going to say a lot of people would have seen, for example, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a few weeks back. I think she jumped into a game of Among Us with a few other fairly well-known streamers, and other than her obsession with what's the guy's name? Corpse Body, whatever his name is. A lot of people were really interested that this was how she was engaging with a lot of her audience.
Yeah, and I think that's right. What you've seen is this growth or this expansion of categories on the service. So historically gaming, but now very much a broad canvas across sports, entertainment, music. We've seen non-gaming content in the last 3 years quadruple in terms of hours watched. We've seen music in the past year has exploded, not just in the number of musicians using the service, but in the number of hours watched has grown exponentially. And I think that just talks to the fact that it's a pretty unique opportunity whereby, the barriers to entry are minimal. You can just set up with a PC, with a camera, a microphone, a bit of software, and away you go. And you have the potential to tap into audiences worldwide. And I think that
yeah,
sorry,
I was
usage you're seeing there.
I was going to say,
reflection of that opportunity.
What happened? What happened to social eating? I remember that a few years ago. That was going to be a big thing. Social eating on Twitch. Do you remember that?
I think whatever you're passionate about, Adrian, you'll find it, and you'll also find a community somewhere for it. And I think that's a good thing. I think people's interests across a wide expanse of categories. The Twitch service reflects that. We have immense growth in all of those non-gaming categories, as well as the typical ones you might expect, like sports and music. But things like chess are blowing up, drag artists, everything's going. I think you'll see even in Ireland, and we've got some Irish streamers. There's something for everyone. You have Donatart, who is very big on our service. You have Tactical Potato, Tweet, Call Me Kevin. You have a whole variety, and Ireland is starting to show up in the kind of the streaming kind of fame lists and the large and significant audiences. So yeah, it's all for everyone.
It's such an interesting world and universe, though, because you're talking about streamers in Ireland. I go onto Twitch and I'll just dip in, do a browse, and I'll see streamers from all over the world, and the cultural norms are just so different. I mean, some of the stories that make it through to the tabloids, for example, one of the best ones in the last few weeks was this guy called Asian Andy, who set up this. His whole shtick was he was taking paid subscriptions from people to wake him up. So if you paid, you could operate, for example, a text to speech recognition service to ask Alexa to wake him up with loud music, and he made 16 grand during the night, I think.
Right. I don't think I would get that kind of income if I did the same.
Yeah. Well, have you tried it?
That's a reflection, though. Just people experimenting, and we're seeing a lot of experimentation that probably doesn't take off, and stuff that does, and some are single instance kind of exceptions where, you know, people sleeping or whatever do get an audience and do effectively monetize very well. But I think the really interesting stuff is people building careers on the service. You know, last year we had 13 million new creators stream for the first time on the Twitch service. You know, 1 million a month. I think that's something like 30,000 a day. It's pretty amazing when you look at those, and it's not the be all and end all of what they're doing. Some of it is kind of side hustles, side careers. Some of them aren't doing it for anything more than engaging with people who are like-minded, have the shared passions and interests. You know, it's not about just getting a big audience for many people. You know, of those 7 million people, only a select few of those will be actually monetizing to the extremes and very big. The rest are doing it to kind of express their passions, their interests. They want dialogue. And the thing about Twitch is it's very much a community of communities. So those people aren't just interacting with their audience. The audience is interacting amongst itself and with the streamer. And it's that multi-directional interaction, I think, is a secret sauce. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it very different. This live, you know, you're not playing catch up. This isn't something you can be part of at a later date. It's you have to be there and then, and your moment may just be there and then if you join at that moment.
Yeah, I read a good essay in The Verge a couple of months back, just before Christmas, and the guy was arguing that he was making the point that Twitch probably was the overall winner of the pandemic. Now, you could attribute that title to an awful lot of services. Zoom would definitely be in with a shout. A lot of the big social platforms would as well. But the point he was making was that he actually logged on to it to watch to other people or to interact with other people. He also schedules his own streams as well. And for him, it was a way of just communing with people during a lockdown. I mean, you talk about some of the professional content creators. I think there was a couple of lists floating around over who the big ones were in 2020. No Tyler Ninja Blevins, by the way, because of I think he jumped ship to Mixer for a while and then he came back. But the figures just from direct subscriptions were pretty big. I mean, the top 10 ranged from sort of around about €1 million to about €2.5 million each. And actually, interestingly, it wasn't necessarily the ones with the most followers that actually made the most money. I mean, I have the list here in front of me, and you know, some of the fifth biggest earner, for example, is a guy called Ronnie Radke, earned $1.5 million, 123,000 followers, compared to the number one, who's 5 million followers, who didn't make much more of them. So it's kind of an interesting. Now, a lot of people say that the money that they make is a lot of it will be commercial deals and sponsorship deals with Fortnite or whoever, commercial brands. But it's a very interesting, when you talk about careers, it's a really, really interesting thing that we haven't really seen before about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's really difficult or I think it's unreliable to take a timestamp and say this is how Twitch is, whether it's the economics of the business, the economics of the creator ecosystem, because it literally changes overnight. You know, if you watch the news, you'll see, you know, the rising stars. Suddenly somebody explodes on Twitch, becomes huge. celebrities coming onto the platform, whether it's Snoop or Lando Norris, Christian Vieri in Italy with his football show. You know, we're seeing this, it just never sits still. And you're right, you won't recognize the names unless you're part of that community. In the most part anyway. You know, we have streamers like Gref G in Spain who you are familiar with him.
I wasn't familiar with him until about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I first started. Because I was familiar with Twitch, but I started diving down a little bit more. And but sorry, go on. You were going.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you know, he did a stream probably just over a month ago, and his concurrent viewership, the maximum people that were tuning in was 2.4 million. Yeah. He was just showcasing his Fortnite skin. And suddenly you've got this huge audience. It's actually a world record. A huge audience for a streamer that's on par with, you know, television broadcast. But the interesting thing is this is international. A Spanish streamer will have a very significant LATAM audience as well, Latin American audience. And I think that is what we're seeing is a truly global service, truly global communities. And the people who are starting to really see great success there are not just leveraging the tools and the technology, but tapping into those communities and starting to kind of engage and understand and interact with them. And what's unfolding is they're just hitting the right notes with those audiences and scaling. And we're just going to see more and more of that.
I mean, it's interesting when there are two news ecosystems around Twitch. There's one which is kind of a mainstream, which would be tabloids, red top, mainstream press. When something breaks out, when something happens, AOC goes on, someone gets banned. A lot of banning stories, by the way. And then there's the other corpus, which is gaming websites, mainly. And actually, what makes news in the gaming website is you know, who got banned. It's almost like a daily story of who got banned. One of the more interesting things, like when you start going into these universes, like I had no idea. I genuinely had no idea. And you're going to think I'm naive about ASMR mics, right? This is I'm not sure if you've come across these before yourself. These are these audio sensory meridian response microphones, and apparently they're not allowed on Twitch. I'm only bringing it up because there was a story of somebody who was banned temporarily for using an ASMR mic. And what these mics are, you go onto YouTube, for example, and you do a search, and you'd see people whispering into the microphone and drumming their nails, and it's supposed to give you that little tingle, you know, in your head, down your spine. You obviously know what I'm talking. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. I wasn't aware of these things, but it just reinforces to me the kind of the universe of experience in reality that maybe I'm unfairly kind of attributing this to kind of Twitch because as a gaming platform, as a gaming universe, being so strong in that world, but it's very much apart from what you would find on the likes of YouTube.
Right. Yeah. Incidentally, we do permit.
You do permit.
We do, and we have a UK streamer called Ruby. He's very successful and does some very interesting things on that level. But I think
maybe it was for adult application of it then. I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think it's important to note, and this is perhaps a differentiator for us versus other services, is that we're not a free speech platform.
Right.
We're not a free speech service. We take a lot of human-based, i.e., moderation teams. We've doubled our trust and safety teams around that. You know, we want to create and maintain a very safe environment for our streamers and our communities. And we have policies which, if you breach them, you will be, banned either indefinitely or for a certain period of time. And we take that very seriously. And I think that is something that, we're just going to continue investing in as the service continues to scale.
Yeah, I mean, that must be one hell of a challenge if the average viewership at any one time is 2.5 million, as you say, and there's so many hours. I mean, how do you scale? What Facebook and Google do, as you know, is they use algorithms and AI, to the nth degree. How do you do that with live streaming?
So we have two approaches. One is the human element, which is a team of moderators and creators are also moderating, and our users can flag any infractions or anything they're worried about, and we will investigate that and take action if necessary. And then secondarily, we have technology, we have AI, we have an auto moderation technology that works across our service, which enables you to varying degrees of stringency, filter out offensive language, content, usernames, whatever it is. And that, I think, is a very scalable solution to that, and it's continuing to see even greater success. Our turnaround times and everything, we just released a transparency report which alludes to that, and our turnaround times for addressing any infractions or perceived infractions has improved markedly. So I think you're right, it is an ever-growing challenge, but it's actually the minority. It's on a very small scale relative to the usage of the service. There's so much good stuff that goes on, not just the kind of entertainment side of it and the communities, but the charities. People use Twitch as a charity for raising money for charities. We had over $80 million raised last year via the Twitch service by some of our streamers. Big ones in France. Zerator is one that I'd call out, who generated or raised over $1 million from just one event called the Z event last year.
Yeah, where you mentioned TV, and it strikes me with the figures that Twitch is doing at the moment, like logically, it kind of is an alternative to TV at the moment. If you look at pandemic viewing, depending on which set of metrics you read, and some of the industry research metrics we get are a little bit skewed because they're paid for by advertisers particularly here in Ireland anyway, the TV industry. So they'll claim that, streaming services are still a tiny minority of viewing, and linear TV is still, 80% of the market, which that just doesn't feel right. But from Twitch's point of view, where does it go from here? Obviously, there have been deals signed for sports, for example. I think there was a deal signed in the UK for a few Premier League matches. Where does Twitch go from here?
So I'll ask. I think you asked two questions there. One was kind of where we see TV versus Twitch, if you will. I think you can look at it in two ways. I think that the younger audience, which is very much reachable on Twitch, in terms of 18 to 35-year-olds. They are consuming less linear TV, and therefore the kind of commercial TV impacts are just not happening to the degree they were against that audience. So if you want to reach them, then of course we are an ideal service in which to do so. And we're seeing that amount of brands obviously using the platform for advertising purposes and sponsorship. But secondarily, I think it's a complementary service as well. So, we have major broadcasters who are using Twitch in addition to obviously their own linear or video on demand services, and that is interesting in itself. And when you add sports to that, you alluded to sports, that was with our parent company Amazon, and Prime Video decided to share some of their, or broadcast some of their Premier League matches on the Twitch platform, and we kind of Twitchified that, if you will. We had some of our FIFA streamers do commentary over that versus the traditional kind of pundits, as you will, and that was very interesting and a great thing to see on the service. But it's all about content strategy, I believe, and audience strategy, and the two intertwine. And what you're seeing is TV companies, i.e. broadcasters, news organizations, football associations and leagues, but also clubs are now really kind of moving onto Twitch en masse. We've got Arsenal, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus, Tottenham Hotspur, amongst others, now on the service, and they're just starting. And you'll see really interesting stuff coming from them in terms of content, exclusive live access to stars, to press conferences, but also that audience interaction opportunity, and that potentially is a first, where you'll see the fans that, let's not forget it, pretty much make these clubs what they are, actually having a voice direct to the clubs. And then alongside that, you have the voice of the fans. One of our biggest entertainers on the platform or streamers on the platform is True Geordie. I don't know if you're familiar with True Geordie, but he has a talk show, and it coincides with big football matches, the Premier League matches, and he will discuss the games, discuss the stars as it's going on. And
is True Geordie the big tattooed guy?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
He used to. It was a True Geordie. He used to have a YouTube channel called
That's right.
Something else. I remember he's pretty funny actually. Particularly when Newcastle kept losing matches, and he'd go absolutely nuts.
He's a very interesting character. His show has incredibly high production values, and he's seen.
I must check that out. I haven't seen that.
He's exclusively live on Twitch. So, do check him and his team out. They're pretty special.
He's exceptionally good at taking abuse, because one of the things I remember when we would do a live stream, and people, like half of the people who'd be giving abuse would be really giving abuse, and then half of them would just be trolling just for the laugh. And he was just really expertly able to handle it, give the trolls kind of what they want, but make it entertaining, but at the same time just manage it kind of very well. That whole fan TV thing, by the way, I mean, I'm not sure, are you an Arsenal fan?
I am, yeah. I was just going to say that won't happen on Twitch because of the moderation and the artificial intelligence.
Right. Okay. But for example,
fan, no,
because I was going to, because one of course, the great fan TV channel there is Arsenal Fan TV, with Robbie and all of his. I'm a Liverpool fan. I'm not an Arsenal fan, but I do stop in on Arsenal Fan TV, usually only when they lose or they're disappointed, because that's when the fireworks are.
Well, that's quite frequent.
well, not in the last month or two,
right,
but and a big game coming up now in a couple of days. Just to go back to TVs, though, one of the reasons I asked about television strategy is it strikes me when I go on Twitch, I can say go onto Arsenal's content. There's a schedule there, like a TV program schedule. I now can maybe buy a JVC or a Hitachi TV, and maybe this year or next year, and I might have I'll see a Twitch app or a Twitch button right there, maybe even on the remote control. I mean, so for me as a TV viewer, I'm now saying, well, will I watch RT, BBC, Sky? Will I watch Amazon Prime? Will I watch Netflix, Disney Plus? Or will I watch Twitch?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. And it actually talks to what we'd call living room. And we've just announced a deal actually with Vestel, our kind of the manufacturer of TVs in Europe, one of the leading ones, and brands like JVC, for example, which will have the Twitch app on their televisions and will have a Twitch button. So you can instantly access the Twitch service, in the comfort of your living room. And Chromecast has it already, Fire has it already. So, on every screen is absolutely kind of an aspiration, or at least a reality right now,
Yeah. Just let me ask you about, you mentioned that Twitch it's not a free speech platform, and Twitch, like every other platform, had to take decisions over the last 6 months around American politics. For example, there's this really interesting conversation happening around where is the right point between a utility and a private company and speech. And maybe Twitch isn't yet at the point where it's like, for example, a YouTube or a Facebook, say, where what it decides on that can have a major ramification on people's ability to communicate. But I wonder, do you think that point is coming? I mean, is there a point where your big platforms are going to be looking for regulatory guidance on what to do in situations like that, do you think?
I think just in the broadest sense, as technology evolves, you're going to see the regulatory side of things try and keep pace with it, and it's tough. But it's important to note that how we see it, we're quite a unique platform, and taking a broad brushstroke to regulation is troublesome and perhaps not very helpful. We're not a service that stores video or audio visual content. We are a live streaming service, and that makes us very, very different. And we would just hope that any kind of regulatory approaches will talk to those nuances. And we also think from a geographic perspective as well, that if you have a very fragmented approach to regulation, that's very troublesome as well, because it slows down implementation, and it slows down interoperability and the ability of users to use a service across borders effectively and gain value from it. Yeah, so that's how we would think about it, Adrian.
There's this kind of very interesting tension at the moment between cross-border services and national parliaments and sovereignty. We've obviously had a turbulent 4 years in the US. That's somewhat coming back to normal now. But the EU as well is asserting its regulatory position on things like privacy. We have the really odd scenario down in Australia with Google and Facebook on publishing. But it feels like we're reaching a moment where there's going to come a point of truth where somebody is going to say, whether it's one of the big platforms or one of the governments is going to say, either you can't do this or we're pulling out of this market because it's too chaotic. That's what it seems like to me looking at it.
Right, and without talking to that specifically, because obviously that's not my domain, but just as kind of an outsider or a third eye, I think broadly it's just becoming more complicated. And if it's becoming more complicated, then that means it's really important that we, I'm only speaking from Twitch's perspective, that we engage with policyholders, policymakers and regulators, and we have that open dialogue, and we support educational initiatives for both consumers but also regulators. We need to share details on our service, how it works, the technical aspects and everything like that, because it's not that well understood, and that is in the broader consumer environment as well. That I think technology and its application and what happens isn't widely understood and is often misrepresented or misinterpreted.
And often I have to say, and I say this as a fully paid member of a newspaper, which is an established newspaper in Ireland Media Group, there's often a competing tension as well. It's not especially popular opinion to have in my trade, but a lot of the discussion on this, there's a slightly unacknowledged competitive edge to it, tension, when you talk about a traditional or legacy media sector, which talks often so witheringly about big platforms, and maybe they're not fully acknowledging their own stake in it, because there's this long soar about advertising and how that dynamic has changed. And you could say a lot of that's tied up in the Australia stuff and Facebook, but also in general. And I do wonder if I had thought that we were getting to a point where we're getting beyond that, but I'm not sure if we're quite beyond it yet. But anyway, that might be a different podcast for a different day. Damian, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time on this. Hope to talk to you again sometime. And that was Damian Burns, Senior Vice President at Twitch. Thanks again to Sky Broadband for sponsoring this podcast. But for me, Adrian Weckler, the tech editor of the Irish Sunday Independent, that's all we have time for this week. Bye-bye.
The Big Tech Podcast, brought to you by Sky Broadband. Get the power to do more with Sky's best ever Wi-Fi, with lightning fast speeds rolling out to 1 million homes.